A mother forced her sons into unaliving their own grandmother and father. This is the case of the manipulative mother. Hilma Marie was born in 1948. Her father left when she was young and her mother suffered with mental illness. Her mother Margaret briefly lost custody of Hilma and her sister when she was admitted into a mental institution. When she was discharged, she regained custody of Hilma and her sister, found a new husband and opened a nudist camp in Florida. Hilma was just 8 years old when her mother and stepfather opened this nudist camp. Now, adults can do anything they want, they're not harming anyone, but bringing a young child into a camp where there are fully grown men walking around naked just doesn't really sit right. At 16, Hilma got married to a fellow nudist at the camp. So Hilma and her soon-to-be husband are fully naked, getting married in front of everyone. Not only that, this camp was open to the public, so people could come and go, and they did. So members from the public came in, were naked, and were taking pictures of that wedding, of a naked 16-year-old girl. Those pictures ended up in a local nudist magazine, and Hilma's mother just didn't seem bothered by it. I think this clearly shows that Hilma's mother perhaps didn't have the mental capacity to be a mother and safeguard her own child. The marriage didn't last long and they got divorced. Hilma ended up marrying another man from this nudist camp, Paul White. He was 10 years her senior. He was outdoorsy, liked fishing, camping, hiking. The newlywed couple, Paul and Hilma, moved to Indiana. Paul went to work and Hilma stayed at home looking after their two sons, Eric and John. Paul was an abusive husband and father. He believed in a very strict parenting style and he mainly took this out on his eldest son, Eric. He believed that being harsh towards Eric would make him become a strong man. When Paul beat his eldest son, Eric, Hilma would often just hide. She would come out afterwards and try and comfort her sobbing son. Hilma didn't want to intervene when Paul was in the throes of beating their eldest son, as she did not want to become a target herself. One day when Eric was just 8 years old, after being beaten by his father, Hilma was comforting him when she suddenly whispered in his ear, "Wouldn't it be better if he were dead?" Shocked, Eric didn't know whether his mother was being serious or whether it was just a turn of phrase. One day when she picked him up from school, Eric was covered in bruises from the night before, and she said to him, "We need to do something. If you were to do it, how would you do it?" Little Eric just looks at his mother blankly, like what child actually has the capacity to concoct a murder plan against their own father? So Hilma went on to say, "You have to poison him. It's for the good of the family. You have to do it." So she's telling her own son to commit murder. Now, I understand that domestic abuse is really difficult to get away from, but to put the pressure on a son and a young child, or any child whatsoever, for it to be their responsibility to save the entire family and murder a father is just wrong and speaks to how Hilma was also mentally unstable. I think this stems from the fact that she was probably exploited at that nudist camp. She certainly wasn't treated as a child and was exposed to things that only an adult should have been exposed to. And this is starting to seep through as she is a mother herself. So initially Hilma did try to poison Paul. She begins putting Valium into his meals and drinks, disguising it as his vitamins. So it was believed that Paul was allergic to Valium. He'd had some reaction to it in the past, but it didn't seem to affect him. Regardless of the dosage that she gave him, he just kind of got drowsy. So she changed her plan. She switched to rat poison, which had arsenic in it. She put small amounts again in his food, but he didn't die. He just kind of got sick every now and then, and this went on for years, but the plan didn't work. By this point, it's been years, and Eric is now 15, so Hilma starts to place an enormous amount of pressure on him to murder Paul. She says she's tried for years and years and it's just not working, so Eric has to do it. So in 1981, Hilma gets Eric a shotgun and says, "You've got to shoot your father. I've got it all planned out. As you're under 18, you'll be tried as a juvenile. You'll be released by the time you're 18 and then we can all live happily ever after." So this mother's plan is for her son to shoot his dad, go to jail for 3 years in the hopes that he will then be released and then they can live as a happy family. So Hilma gives Eric this gun and says, "When your father walks through the front door, shoot him." So Eric is hiding behind this door, and as Paul walks in, Eric is frozen to the spot. He can't move, he feels sick. His father walks towards the sofa, puts on the TV and lies down. Eric just can't move. He can't do it. His head is racing, he's sweating. Eventually, he hears his father snoring and just walks away. He just can't bring himself to murder his own dad. He tells his mother, "I'm really sorry, I couldn't do it." She says, "Don't worry, we'll try again another day." Unbeknown to Eric, Hilma is running out of time. She took a loan out, which she told Paul was for some new furniture. It wasn't, it was just for herself, and she spent the money. When Paul finds out, he is gonna go ballistic. Hilma would end up facing the wrath of his anger, and what that meant, she was unsure. She starts placing an immense amount of pressure on Eric. On the 1st of September 1981, she turns to Eric and says, "I'm leaving the house. When I return, your father best be dead. If not, I'm gone forever." Later that evening, Hilma rings Eric and asks, "Is it done?" Eric responds, "No, I'm sorry, it's not." She says, "I'm coming back in 15 minutes. If it's not done, that's it, I'm running away." So Eric has been placed in this awful situation. He doesn't want to murder his father, but he also really doesn't want his mother to leave, and therefore him and his younger brother are alone in the house, facing the horrendous beatings of his father. His mother has also made it seem like Eric has the responsibility of saving his family. He has to do something so macabre in order for the greater good. Eric walks down the stairs and sees his dad sleeping on the couch. He then sees his mother's headlights coming into the drive, and these are the final moments for him to make a decision: lose his father or lose his mother. He walks slowly up to his father, raises the gun and shoots him in the head. Hilma then comes through the front door and begins consoling her sobbing son. He is trembling. He physically cannot stand up. He is in so much pain. Hilma then dials 911 and tells her son to stick to the story. So their story is that Eric found this gun, came running into the living room to show his dad, accidentally tripped and let the gun off, shooting his father. To be fair, it's believable. Their house isn't particularly clean. There's a lot of clutter, a lot of things on the floor. It's pretty messy. When the police arrive and Hilma and Eric tell them this story, and Eric is clearly very upset and distraught, they believe them. It's a believable story. Eric seems incredibly emotional, like he's just done something he genuinely didn't want to do. It was like a genuine accident. So it was classified as an accident, no charges were filed, and the police left. So although Eric was distressed, he didn't feel guilty. He had suffered years of abuse from his father, and the death of Paul meant that Eric could go on and live a normal life. He didn't have to come home and be scared. He didn't have to worry day to day what his dad was going to do to him. Hilma and her sons, Eric and John, end up moving in with Paul's mother, Elaine. Eric and John adore their grandmother, and life is perfect for like 3 years. They get on really, really well. Elaine looks at Hilma as though the daughter she'd never had, so they have this kind of picture-perfect life. This lasts for about 3 years, and then one day, Elaine, who is 74, notices that her social security checks are going missing. They were usually snail mailed to her, and she hadn't received one in like ages, and when she kind of asked Hilma about it, Hilma vehemently denied it and got kind of angry. In reality, Hilma had been cashing in those checks for herself. What was once a very happy, loving home now became tense and uneasy, and it was only going to get worse. One day, Eric, the eldest son, notices his mother mixing something into Elaine's food, something he's seen before when Hilma did the same to their father. Eric is livid. He understands their plan against their father, who tormented them, abused them, was a monster in their own home. But to do the same to this little sweet old lady, he didn't understand. Why was she trying to murder their grandmother? Hilma, however, was undeterred, and she was adamant that Elaine had to go. She would often speak to Eric and John about murdering her, to the point where Eric felt that the only way to deal with this situation was to literally escape. So he signed up for the Navy And in 1983, at 18 years old, Eric leaves for boot camp. With Eric gone, Hilma turns her attention to her youngest son, John, who is just 14 years old at the time. She goes on and on about how Eric's gone, it's now his responsibility to murder their grandmother. John just can't cope, and one evening he gets really drunk and really high in the basement. He's playing video games. John has spent the entire night and early hours of the morning drinking and taking drugs. He cannot cope with the pressure that his mother is placing on him. On January the 8th, 1984, he walked into his grandmother's bedroom as she slept, got his medieval crossbow and shot her in the heart. She died instantly. They just leave her there, and Hilma and John actually end up taking a train because Hilma is due in court because she has been claiming her dead husband's disability allowances. So it's just like, right, on to the next thing. There's kind of no remorse. They just leave their grandmother on the bed, dead. They don't call 911. They don't do anything. They're just like, oh, we best go to court now. After that, Hilma contacts the Navy saying that Eric needs to come home. There's been a family emergency. So she wants Eric's help. She wants him to witness this horror scene. She has no motherly instinct to protect her sons. She's like, right, Eric, come back. This is now your responsibility to deal with. So he comes back, and she takes him to the basement where there is a freezer that has been locked up in chains. She unlocks these chains, opens the freezer where Eric sees random bags of what looks like very weird frozen meat. Hilma then says, "That's your grandmother." Hilma and John had spent an entire week dismembering Elaine's body into manageable chunks using chainsaws, knives and chisels. They flushed the majority of her down the toilet and the garbage disposal. They microwaved parts of her, placed some in the oven and cooked her. They even placed some parts and deep fat fried her. To get rid of as much evidence as possible, they also dissolved the larger parts in acid. All the remaining pieces they then chopped into manageable chunks, and by this point they just didn't look like human body parts at all. They bagged these parts up and then put them in the freezer. Eric is just like in shock at what he's looking at. He is looking at his loved grandmother bagged up in a freezer. Hilma, however, just has absolutely no remorse. This is why I think she's just incredibly mentally ill. She looks at her eldest son, Eric, and says, "That's your fault and you need to sort it out." Panicked, knowing that his brother also helped in this murder and actually obviously committed it, he says, right, what we're going to do is we're going to tell everyone that Elaine has gone on vacation. Eric knows that this lie is only going to last so long, but it just gives him time to think. He then makes his way back as he just wants nothing to do with it. He clearly sees that his mother is so disturbed, and again, he just wants to escape. Him and his friend drive back, and halfway there, they notice this awful smell coming from the boot. They pull over. Eric opens up the boot and looks in the cooler box that his mother had put in there for him, opens it up and sees just rotting bits of flesh with maggots all over it. His mother had placed parts of his grandmother's remains in a box, in a cooler box, in the boot of the car, either to taunt him, to remind him of his responsibilities, or to scare him. We don't know. But Eric freaked out. He didn't want to leave it at the side of the road. So him and his friend decided to carry on driving. And when they got to California, Eric rented a storage place and just put it in there. He had no idea what to do with it. He didn't want to leave it somewhere public. Back at home, Hilma gets the help of her mother, Margaret, to dispose of the last parts of Elaine's body. Time is going on and friends are starting to ask questions, like it's been nearly 8 months and they're still saying Elaine is on vacation. Through all of that time, Hilma is still cashing in Elaine's social security checks. One of Elaine's friends has enough. She doesn't believe the explanation, so she goes to the police and says, look, I haven't seen my friend. She's in her 70s for nearly 8 months. Something's not right. The police turn up to the residence and immediately are suspicious. One accidental death and now one disappearance in the same family. This isn't adding up. So Hilma is brought in for some initial questioning, and when she is released, she realises she's probably not going to get away with it. So her plan is to take John, go pick up Eric, and make it across the border into Mexico. When they get to California and they're going to go pick up Eric, Hilma decides to cash in another one of Elaine's social security checks. She has just been questioned for the disappearance of Elaine, but she is still cashing in those social security checks. This comes up on the system and Hilma and John are arrested. Eric was also subsequently arrested and brought in for questioning. All three of them are now in the station being questioned, and initially Eric denies anything. He is staying quiet, but over time Eric and John are given a plea deal. So in exchange for testifying against their mother, they are convicted of manslaughter. They get 20 years but only serve 11, and then they are released. Hilma is arrested and she confesses to part of her involvement, but she places most of the blame on her sons, saying they're the ones that did it. It wasn't really anything to do with me. When John testified against his mother, he said that Hilma told him he could either kill Elaine with his crossbow or strangle her. John said he just wanted to help his mother, and after the murder, Hilma consoled him, saying, "Don't worry about it," as though he just spilled a glass of milk. He then said they dismembered the body so they wouldn't have to go through a police investigation like his brother Eric had to when he murdered his dad. They disposed of her parts in such a way that none of it was ever recovered. Hilma, on the other hand, tried to say that John killed his grandmother because he was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. This didn't convince the jury. Nobody believed her in court. Truth about their father in court also came out as well. Hilma, aged 38, was sentenced to 90 years in prison for murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He has been denied parole twice and will be eligible again in 2028, aged 79. That's the case of Hilma Marie Witte, the mother who manipulated her sons. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next one.